Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on LTE, Global Trends and Operator Strategies. My name is Paul Lambert and I'm an analyst with Informa Telecoms and Media's Operator Strategy team. I've been tracking LTE launch strategies since the first networks were launched back in 2009 in Scandinavia. Since then, I've been tracking how operators are launching and positioning LTE in their markets as vendors and handset manufacturers have been rapidly evolving the technology. They've been successfully doing this by extending the availability of LTE through a mix of lower equipment prices and also through expanding the size of the LTE equipment market, bringing about in the process a rapid decline in the cost of this equipment, in particular for LTE smartphones and other devices. So last year's webinar focused on LTE launch strategies, what was working and what wasn't, and today's webinar is intended to be an update on how these strategies have developed and how consumers have reacted to them. It's been fascinating to track the evolution of the LTE market over the past 12 months because I've seen many of the approaches that were bringing success to LTE operators in 2012 develop and evolve. From a very high-level perspective, I think it's indisputable that LTE vendors have individually and collectively absolutely made good on the promises of this ultra-fast and more spectrally efficient mobile broadband technology. And it's fair to say that the LTE market, large as it is still in its initial phase of development. What I think that means is that we're at a uniquely interesting moment in the trajectory of the mobile telecoms industry and how it is extending its role in society. And LTE is absolutely central to this evolution. So coming to today's session, this webinar starts with a detailed snapshot of the global LTE market, which I plan to speed through so we don't get too bogged down in the numbers, and then I'll move on to look at in more detail at the effects LTE is having on operator KPIs and the main reasons why. Although that's only a few topics, it's a lot of ground to cover in the time we have and to allow room for questions, and at best it can only offer a taste of the extensive research into LTE that myself and my colleagues have carried out over the past 12 months. So based on past experience, I'm sure there will be plenty of good questions coming in, so without further ado, let's begin. So starting with an overview of the LTE market, and the first question I'll look at during this session, which is where is LTE today? It's clear that globally the market is still in the early stages of LTE launches. The leading regions in terms of subscriptions are North America with almost 79 million subs and Asia Pacific with just over 65 million. I think it's quite incredible that in just over two or three years after the first LTE networks were launched in the region, LTE subs have already passed the 50% penetration point. The other regions outside of North America and Asia Pac are clearly lagging in terms of LTE penetration, with Europe, which saw the first LTE network launches, seeing just 5.5% of its overall mobile user base signed up to LTE price plans at N3Q. I think this chart illustrates that from a global perspective at least, LTE is, as I said, still very much in its infancy. This is in no way a negative, given that 3G networks and devices are meeting the needs of mobile broadband access in the majority of usage scenarios, and of course at lower cost to both operators and end users. And while we're close, we've still yet to see LTE device costs come down to the level where it's profitable for operators to aggressively target prepaid users, especially in the lower GDP emerging markets. That said, for an operator in any market that's seeing strong mobile broadband use, the reasons for launching LTE are becoming increasingly compelling as people spend more and more time accessing the internet from their mobiles and the resultant demand increases. So here we can see LTE subscription growth by region over the last 2 years. Increasing operator commitment to LTE and end user interest in 4G services, when they're positioned by operators in the right way, has resulted during 2013 in a massive 223% year-on-year increase in global LTE subscriptions to the end of September. Given that the rollout of LTE networks is patchy when looked at from a global perspective, this gives some detail to the idea that LTE is still in the early stages of development from a global market perspective. Again, as you can see here, North America continues to lead LTE subscription numbers, driven by the early LTE launches by AT&T and Verizon Wireless, while operator commitment in developed and developing Asia Pac means that this region again comes in second place, as it did in 2012, with a year-on-year subscription growth to N3Q13 as strong as was experienced in North America. So here I'd just like to quickly focus on the lower chart, which shows the responses to Informa Telecoms and Media's survey of the global LTE market, which we carried out during 2Q and 3Q of this year. To gauge LTE operators' thinking on why they've launched LTE, one of the questions we asked was, why is now the right time to deploy LTE? Well, as you can see, the vast majority, almost 84% of the operator respondents, believe that there is a viable business case to launch LTE today. Almost 33% said they plan to launch LTE this year. The main reasons given by operator respondents center on gaining competitive advantage by launching LTE. Secondly, current networks don't offer sufficient capacity. Operators also said that users want greater speeds, which is causing them to migrate to LTE. And finally, operators said that they want to create new revenue streams using LTE. So just a brief look at this slide. Here you can see that the top 10 LTE operator is, not surprisingly, populated by operators in the leading LTE markets of the US, Korea and Japan. It's worth pointing out here that the top 20 LTE operators by subscriptions have over 90% of the global total number of LTE subscriptions. This clearly shows that operators that have launched LTE to date have very different levels of commitment to signing up subscribers to LTE. And I think it's fair to say that you can put LTE operators in broadly, kind of quite crudely, two camps. The ones that are very aggressive in terms of signing up LTE subscriptions, and then those that have launched LTE networks simply to gain a toehold in the market and to symbolically, shall we say, take a position in 4G ahead of rivals. So EE is one of the leading LTE operators in Europe as a result of an incredibly successful and very aggressive LTE launch just over a year ago. And we'll look at why it's been so successful later on in the webinar. So moving on to look at how quickly some of the other leading LTE operators have reached their current levels of LTE penetration. Here we can see that the Korean operators have reached high levels of LTE penetration between 7 and 9 quarters after launch, which is an incredibly fast rate of subscription uptake. Again, we'll look in more detail at why this is the case later in the webinar. So moving on to the next slide, which is now, and now we're going to look at the LTE having looked at LTE numbers, I thought it would be useful to look at something of a summary of what's actually driving LTE subscription uptake, before moving on to look in more detail at the specific drivers for this subscription uptake. So moving around from the top right hand box, the first factor I think driving consumer interest in LTE, and we've touched on this already, is devices. Because the most sought after devices such as the iPhone and Samsung Galaxy smartphones, to name just two, can connect to an increasing number of LTE frequencies, and crucially the price of them is coming down, more people can access the network and also afford the devices to do so. In fact, I'd say that from an end user perspective, the decreasing cost of LTE devices is the key driving factor causing consumers to migrate to LTE. Put another way, device price is no longer a barrier for the mid to high end 3G contract and prepaid user bases in developed and also developing markets to make the move from 3G to 4G. So the second factor driving LTE subscription growth has to do with tariff pricing, something I'll look at in much more detail later on. Just to briefly mention here that the most successful LTE operators aren't charging a premium for LTE access over 3G, which we'll see is absolutely crucial in driving LTE subscription uptake. Thirdly, LTE operators are aggressively expanding their networks, again rapidly growing the addressable market for LTE. And the final key driver for strong LTE uptake in the markets with highest LTE penetration has been that the successful launch by one operator of LTE has caused rivals to follow suit soon after, thereby again expanding the addressable market and bringing competition to the market, to the operators that have already launched. This has been the case in the US, Japan and South Korea, while in one of Europe's pioneering 4G markets, the UK, the first operator to launch LTE held its lead for around a year because of government legislation that prevented its rivals from launching. So that was something of of an exception in terms of a first LTE operator launching and then rivals not following suit very soon after. So I want to look at the impact LTE has had on KPIs near the beginning of the webinar, because this is the reason operators are launching their technology, and I wanted to make sure this is one of the central focus points of this afternoon's session. So what does the initial evidence tell us? Well, according to the evidence from the market to date, it's very much good and encouraging news, because some LTE operators are seeing a clear positive impact on KPIs having launched the technology. I won't go through each of these data points now, but just to mention a few of them here. So SKT is seeing as much as a 50% increase in monthly data usage on LTE compared with 3G, with the respective figures standing at 1.6 gigabytes and 1.1 gigabyte at end June 2013. In Japan, Docomo is seeing that LTE smartphone users consume as much as 8 times more data compared to 3G users. A third of Verizon Wireless's retail postpaid connections now have a 4G device, and as much as 59% of its total data traffic is now on its 4G network. In the UK, EE has found that existing subscribers who have moved to 4G show an increase in ARPU of around 10%. In the US, AT&T has 35% of its postpaid smartphone base using LTE-capable devices, and smartphone data usage per device has increased as much as 50% year-on-year to end 2Q13, causing wireless data revenues to increase almost 20% year-on-year. And finally, since launch, Rogers Wireless in Canada has seen an 80% increase in wireless internet usage year-on-year. All of which is very encouraging news. So just to look at the effect of LTE on actual operator reported KPIs. So here you can see that since launching LTE, some of the leading LTE operators are seeing that 4G services contribute to a positive impact on KPIs. Although it's difficult to isolate the impact of one particular service on an operator's performance, there is evidence over and above the ad hoc data points we just looked at in the previous slide that LTE is contributing positively to operators' KPIs. On the top graph, you can see that the operators are each seeing stable postpaid ARPU developments having launched LTE. And when you take into account that the US market in particular is seeing renewed competition over the last year or so, not least from a reinvigorated T-Mobile, AT&T's and Verizon's ARPU trends are very encouraging for them, and I think the industry in general. Taken together and individually, each of these data points provides concrete evidence that LTE, if launched in the right way, can improve operator KPIs. At this point in time, this is hugely encouraging for the mobile industry. So before moving into the section on the components of a successful LTE launch, I wanted to offer a snapshot of what's driving this increase in data use that some LTE operators are seeing. So let's drill down further into pricing, and specifically the premium approach to pricing LTE. I think, in fact, that the question of whether operators charge a premium or not for LTE is the single most important lever in determining the rate of subscription uptake. Here we can see that the most successful LTE operators in terms of subscriptions currently don't charge more for accessing their 4G network than they do the 3G network. Some, including Docomo in Japan and some of the early LTE launches in Nordic markets, as well as EE, charged a premium for 4G access at launch to try and take first mover advantage. But these operators subsequently moved their prices to be more in line with 3G pricing, or on a par with 3G pricing. By contrast, operators such as Verizon and AT&T and the Korean operators launched LTE charging no extra cost compared to their 3G tariffs. The result was that as more compelling LTE devices came to market, these operators saw much stronger LTE subscription growth than the operators that charged a premium for LTE did. Operators that didn't follow the premium route also saw positive effects on KPIs that came through increased data usage. So that's a quick look at the premium approach to LTE pricing. How have operators evolved? An operator that started with a premium approach evolved pricing away from premium toward parity with 3G look like in practice. EE is one of the operators that I track that is really relevant to today's session because it has replicated many aspects of the other successful LTE launch strategies I've seen, for instance in the US and Korea, and also because it launched LTE at a premium over 3G, going somewhat against the experiences of the operators in the US and Korea, where they didn't charge a premium for 4G over 3G. So I think it's, because of that, I think it's important to still examine the idea of premium pricing, because not least because some operators are still launching in the market today with this approach. So very briefly, what did EE do? Well, by offering LTE an entry-level £36 a month for 500 megabyte of data with unlimited calls and texts, EE showed that it wanted LTE to be accessible to its entire postpaid mobile broadband user base. At the same time, it hoped to realize a premium on LTE from those who wanted more data use. All of LTE's plans were at a premium to its 3G plans of around £5 a month. So just to recap, at launch, EE charged around £5 more to access the 4G network than it compared to its 3G pricing. So as the network evolved and as the price of 4G devices came down, and as EE tapped the early adopter segment of its user base with 4G, EE then evolved its 4G pricing by discounting its entry-level 4G postpaid plan, and then it was actually the 500 megabyte data allowance plan was actually offered at the same price as the comparable 3G 500 megabyte plan, which then obviously led to much stronger uptake of LTE price plans that EE was offering, particularly the 500 megabyte entry-level plan. So then, having launched 4G for the postpaid segment, EE proceeded to launch 30-day SIM-only plans, starting at a very, very competitive £23 for 500 megabytes of data, which also included unlimited voice and SMS. And then to further evolve its 4G pricing, as the launches by its main competitors Vodafone and O2 loomed over the summer, EE introduced shared data plans and also prepaid mobile broadband price plans. So I think EE is a great example of not just how to evolve the premium approach if part of the market will accept it, but also that charging no premium for 4G is currently the optimum approach to pricing LTE services, because that's exactly where EE is with the majority of its 4G price plans at the moment. So I wanted to include this chart because it shows how the first operators to launch LTE in a market, EE in this case, has been able to evolve its pricing before its main rivals launch. So as we saw, EE launched 4G at a justifiable premium over 3G price plans because of the faster speeds it offered, and also because it bundled more content into 4G price plans compared to 3G, which is something we'll look at later in the webinar. But what I think has been a really fantastic move by EE is as Vodafone and O2 launched their own 4G networks, in October this year, it launched a new premium 4G tariff, which was £5 more than the comparable existing 4G tariffs that it offered, and also 3G tariffs from that Orange and T-Mobile, the component companies of EE, the tariffs they were offering. So what is brilliant is that EE succeeded in kind of evolving its 4G tariffs by adding more data into its price plans, the premium price plans, and also offering increased network speeds as well as free roaming to certain countries. So with the premium approach, EE was both able to kind of tap the low end of the contract market, and also with its, on the other hand, with its premium approach, EE further added value and monetized that value at the higher end of the contract market with increased network speeds and also higher amounts of data, and the name of that premium 4G tariff that EE launched was 4G EE Extra. So moving on to marketing LTE. LTE operators are using enhanced qualities of the technology to improve their overall brand positioning, mainly around the concepts of speed and quality, and to a lesser extent technology leadership. EE has positioned its marketing around each of these concepts in a campaign specifically focused on explaining the benefits of 4G to a market that wasn't aware of what 4G is and what the benefits of 4G are. So EE, I think, did a great job with its marketing in educating the UK consumers about the benefits of 4G, and one of the if you go right to the bottom line of the core concepts that EE communicated to the UK market, it was very much centered around speed and the enhanced speed benefits that 4G brings over 3G. And I think if you also look, you could pick many operator examples that show that emphasis and reliance on speed to communicate the benefits of 4G. But here I just chose AT&T and Verizon, who are just one of many other leading LTE operators that really emphasize that sense of enhanced speed over 3G. And I think this approach has been very effective in effectively positioning 4G at a higher end of the market than 3G. That doesn't necessarily mean that operators have tried to charge a premium approach for that, but they have tried to maintain pricing levels around this overall sense of enhanced speed and sometimes enhanced value in terms of exclusive content services. So the LTE launches in emerging markets we've seen today have a lot of commonality with the early launches in developed markets. Here we can see Vodacom in South Africa following an LTE roadmap that has a lot of overlap with those in the more developed mobile markets. And that commonality specifically is the evolution of pricing as the network expands and the price of devices coming down. So even where an operator opted for the slight premium approach, this has been very quickly brought closer and closer to parity with 3G pricing as the network expands, as the early adopters are locked into new 12 or increasingly 24-month price plans with the 4G premium. So evolving the network, evolving pricing as the cost of devices to operators comes down. So now that we've looked at the main components for a successful 4G launch that leads to robust subscriber uptake, I think it's a good time to quickly sum up what the key components of a successful LTE launch are. And I think these are very simply, but very much worth stating: pricing, compelling devices, and increasingly importantly, offering a quality network experience that is demonstrably better than the 3G network experiences. So here are some of the approaches operators are using to reduce some of the unintended consequences of the success they've had with LTE in terms of higher subsidies on devices and an increased strain on the network. So let's briefly take them one by one. First of all, separating the cost of the device from the price plan. This operators have been doing to reduce the amount of subsidies they're paying to get LTE devices into an increasing number of users. So for instance, T-Mobile USA, AT&T, Vodafone with its Red Hot initiative, and O2 with its Refresh program are just some of the examples of how operators are trying to separate the cost of the device from the price plan, to try and reduce the amount they pay in subsidies and shift the cost of the device back to the consumer. So the next point here is investing in CDNs to optimize delivery of content and alleviate the burden on the network. Some examples of these are Verizon acquiring Edgecast, Orange's strategic partnership with Akamai, and also KT and LG U Plus are in the market, South Korea, emerging as major CDN players in their own right. The final point here is investing in spectrum to expand the network to deliver a true 4G experience. So I think this is the idea that operators are utilizing their spectrum assets to try and offer more of a 4G experience than their rivals are, that may potentially have either less spectrum than they have or have been less aggressive on the network rollout. So, for instance, Verizon is already using some of the strength of its spectrum assets to deliver a mobile broadband experience to more of the population and at greater speeds in areas that see particularly high use. And related to this idea of real 4G or true 4G, some comments that come to mind made by Vittorio Calao, the Vodafone CEO, who this year said he expected that the operators that have a particularly strong 4G spectrum position in comparison to competitors will be able to gain a real advantage over rivals if they can successfully deliver on the promise of what he himself called real 4G, to differentiate by communicating the quality of the network and really positioning that superior network quality compared to what rivals are offering. And it's also worth briefly mentioning here that some operators are seeing initial success using shared data plans in conjunction with LTE to better monetize network traffic. So a lot of what we've looked at so far boils down to the fact that operators are launching faster networks and are either charging not much more for access, or they're charging the same as they are for access to 3G. Because of what we've seen on how 4G is having a positive impact on KPIs, this is in no way a bad thing. But is it really the case that 4G is just 3G with faster wheels on? Well, let's have a look at that question. So in this section, we're going to take a closer look at how some operators are approaching 4G in a way that makes the answer to this question a clear no, but for subtle reasons. So if you look at how SKT is using LTE to differentiate from rivals, it's really doing this by bundling more value into its LTE offering. For starters, SKT doesn't charge for voice over LTE access, which it launched in August last year, and the first operator in the world to do so. Neither does SKT charge for rich messaging access. It bundles join access into its all its 4G subscriptions. And LTE Advanced, SKT doesn't charge for access to the faster network speeds that LTE Advanced offers. So that's quite an incredible amount of increased value that SKT is bundling into its 4G subscription packages. And I think some of the reasons that it's doing this very successfully is not just to differentiate from rivals and position in the market as a very as an operator that offers an exceptional 4G network experience that also includes access to lots of value-added premium services for free at no extra cost compared to the 3G price plans. It's also doing this to increase the amount that 4G users spend, the amount of time 4G users spend on the network. So bundling in all of this increased, all these increased services is actually bringing about an increase in usage that is in turn having a positive impact on SKT's KPIs. So I think it's worth pointing out that may seem, maybe 12 months ago, that would have been a little bit, maybe it would have seemed a little bit counterintuitive, because I think operator thinking was of the mind that with the launch of 4G networks, operators will be able to charge more for access to advanced services or LTE only services. But in fact, operators like SKT are showing that in fact offering these advanced services at the same price as 3G is leading to an increase in usage. And for instance, it's not just SKT. Just look at EE in the UK, which, like SKT, was focused not just on launching its 4G network, but adding value to its 4G plans to really differentiate them from 3G. For instance, EE offers one free film download a week that doesn't consume mobile data allowance. It also offers phone backup with different level of backup for different levels of its 4G subscriptions, with the most comprehensive backup of the of data bundled in with the 4G extra price plans. And also in the UK, if you look at Vodafone, it's offering access to very premium content, for instance, sports and Spotify music streaming, and it's offering those for free on its premium 4G price plans, and then offering them to 4G only to 4G subscribers who are on the lower price plans at between £5 and £10 a month, over and above what they're paying for access to the network. So the idea here is that operators are using the enhanced characteristics of LTE to really add more value, add more services into the 4G subscriptions. So I've already mentioned the importance some operators are placing on the quality of the 4G experience to differentiate from rivals. And I think because of this, we're seeing the increasing importance of independent network tests to underpin operators' 4G marketing, to convince the market that they really do offer the best 4G experience available. What this shows is that even more than with 3G, investing in the quality of the network and communicating this to the market is proving to be a crucial factor in winning and retaining the most valuable mobile broadband users. And as people consume more and more data, which is what, as we've seen, is actually happening with 4G, I think network quality will only become more and more of a key focus for LTE operators. So that means really investing in the network, being able to offer demonstrably the best mobile broadband experience in the market, and also effectively communicating that to the market, and not just the marketing snapshots I've kind of decided to put into the presentation here. You can look at any leading LTE operator and see something very similar to this, and in tandem to that is the really visible communication about independent network tests and how they are validating the marketing messages about offering the best mobile broadband experience. So here I'd like to just take a quick look at what competition between 4G operators looks like, and some of the ideas from the previous slides to give an idea of how operators can avoid competing for 4G customers solely on the price of their services. So the idea here is that price competition might be able to be avoided if operators can focus on the quality of the network experience and the overall range of services offered. Imagine the arrow is the mid-range of current 3G pricing. I think the idea here is that if you look at 4G in the US, Korea, Japan and the UK, price competition is being avoided when operators can offer tangibly more value in their 4G subscriptions. In this way, operators can try and maintain pricing levels rather than engage in destructive price wars. Put another way, there doesn't have to be one person standing over its defeated competitors. As we've seen, 4G, if approached in the right way, can help bring about a positive contribution to KPIs. So, 4G price competition can be avoided if operators focus on value and they focus on quality. So, how are operators evolving LTE-only services with VoLTE, LTE Advanced and LTE roaming? So, LTE-only services are at the very beginning of their evolution. These examples are some of the first, and they point to just some of the ways that operators are exploiting the unique benefits of LTE. I think the key thing underlying kind of operators thinking on LTE at the moment is a kind of growing commitment and an emerging partnership mentality that will ensure that LTE-only services proliferate both in the consumer and the enterprise arenas. So, for instance, automotive services using LTE are one major area that's poised for mass market uptake, and operators will only increase their scope and range of partnerships with players in vertical industries to extend LTE into new areas such as healthcare, energy, and new types of telematics services and automotive services. So although LTE-only services are in their infancy, the number of operators committing to them is steadily increasing, with a wide range of different types of services being deployed on LTE-only networks. To highlight just a few of these examples here, Sprint PTS is examining how LTE can be used to optimize mobile video delivery. Operators are also beginning to offer content that is only available over 4G. As we've seen, and as has been mentioned already, just look at EE with its film service in the UK and Vodafone with its sports and streaming services as ways that operators are offering content only over 4G networks. So we've already touched on how aggressive LTE operators are. Some of them are evolving their LTE networks, and here are some more examples of how the operators are approaching this. So SKT's LTE Advanced Network, which was launched in June this year, the operator have very aggressive plans with LTE Advanced expansion, expecting to have around 32,000 LTE base stations by the end of the year. Verizon Wireless has launched LTE services this year in the 1.7 GHz, 2.1 GHz ORS band to increase LTE capacity and speeds in its major markets, and at the same time, underlining its commitment to LTE Advanced, Verizon has launched its first two devices supporting both LTE carrier aggregation and LTE in the AWS band, paving the way for the launch of LTE services next year. And just look at EE in the UK, which launched its LTE Advanced services to business subscribers in London, offering maximum speeds of up to 300 megabytes per second. EE will use carrier aggregation, bringing together frequencies in its 1800 megahertz and 2.6 gigahertz spectrum blocks to boost speeds from the current maximum of 150 megabytes per second. So, operators are already, very much engaged in evolving LTE network speeds even beyond what is capable today to offer more and more capability to the consumer and enterprise markets. So there have been sporadic deployments of voice over LTE to date, with just a few operators building on the world's first launch, as we mentioned, by SKT in Korea. So I think operators thinking on VoLTE, which has maybe been a little slower than some in the industry have been anticipating this time last year, this delay has been because operators have a technology solution to voice in the LTE context that that does a very good job of routing voice calls over 2G and 3G networks when the call is set up. So that's circuit switch fallback for GSM and SVLT for CDMA operators. So no major headlong rush into VoLTE, although next year we're going to see some very interesting developments in this area, and I think one of the most interesting questions around VoLTE is not only when operators will launch, but how will they position enriched voice in the context of legacy voice services when they launch, and how will operators give voice a new lease of life when they launch voice over LTE. So LTE voice in the context of LTE offers operators lots of ways to kind of remake voice the killer app and to kind of do some new things with enriched voice. So that'd be very interesting to see operator developments into 2014 on that. So just looking at LTE roaming here, although LTE roaming is still in the initial phase of development, some operators have already implemented bilateral intra-regional roaming and multilateral inter-regional roaming. And also last week, Telenor launched intra-group LTE roaming, so that's for its operator companies in Europe and Asia-Pac, which is another sign that this service is poised for widespread rollout in 2014 and beyond. So also, similarly with Fuente, the question is not just when operators will launch, but how will they breathe new life into voice with LTE. Similarly with roaming, the question is not just when operators will launch, but how will they position and price LTE roaming in the context of 3G roaming services. So to sum up with some conclusions and recommendations here before moving on to look at your questions. So 4G operators that have faced competition that are the most successful aren't charging a premium for 4G access. I think this is still one of the major key kind of learnings that successful LTE operators have taught the market. That is that if operators don't charge a premium for 4G, they can both see very, very strong LTE subscription uptake, and they can see an improvement in KPIs, which is mainly coming about through the increased usage that the better enhanced 4G network experience is giving consumers. So I think I'm looking at the where the market is today. It's still very much in its infancy from a global perspective. Lots of operators still to launch. I think those that can launch 4G a year or so ahead of 6 months, a year ahead of rivals, do have the opportunity to price 4G at a slight premium. But I think those who aren't in the position of having that head start over rivals will find it very, very hard to bring about increased LTE subscription uptake. And if they, in the absence of a very compelling reason from the end user perspective as to why they should pay more for 4G over 3G. So, in fact, looking at the second point here, operators that have managed to charge a premium are those that haven't faced much or any 4G competition. And these operators have only charged a small premium to 3G, and a premium that they've been able to justify by the increase in the overall value that they offered. And that overall value has taken the form not just of increased speeds over 3G, but also additional services that 4G operators are offering. So, third point here, in terms of conclusions, operators need to plan a very effective 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G migration strategy. So ahead of launching, operators really need to work out what segments of their existing user bases they want to target for migration to 4G and how quickly. And I think this segmentation and the ability to look to have a really granular view of what the mobile broadband usage is like among the existing 3G user base is really essential to be able to effectively target the mid to high end 3G mobile broadband users for migration to 4G. And also, how simply can an operator make it for an existing subscriber to change to a 4G price plan? So, how many, how much does an operator want to commit to removing some of the hurdles that end users often go through when they want to migrate to a new price plan? So, locking into lengthy new contracts, buying, investing in new devices if they're not subsidized, and how will that migration from 2G to 3G from 2G, 3G to 4G look like for an existing subscriber. Operators really need to think about that ahead of 4G network launches. So final point here, for conclusion, evidence from 4G launches to date suggests that operators that pursue best-in-class network quality and position marketing around it are succeeding in winning and retaining the most valuable subscribers. So, really keeping that emphasis on the quality of the network really is essential. And the most successful LTE operators are really doing that. They're really communicating to the market what their network offers. It's really the foundation for a 4G network strategy, I think. Getting that network quality in place and then also communicating it to the market. So, some recommendations. I think LTE network launches shouldn't be looked at as in any way a kind of magic bullet that is going to increase ARPU. But LTE network launch should be just one part of an overall strategy to increase data usage in conjunction with pricing and content. So you don't just switch on your LTE network and hope for the best, which some operators, I think with their kind of symbolic LTE launches, that's kind of some of the thinking that we're seeing. But I think operators are moving away from that and really having a holistic approach to how they position 4G and looking at how it sits in with how 4G can be a platform to increase the overall value that they offer end users to not just win the most profitable subscribers in the market, but retain the ones that they have. Operators should design their pricing strategy and overall content strategy to encourage more data usage, which will encourage users to move up to data plans that offer more data. I think this is really key, that the services that are just coming on stream now are by themselves causing people to use data more and more on the go. So I think that when the network experience is as good as it's proving to be on 4G, operators are using the network much more. They're doing more. They're uploading videos. They're downloading videos. Their overall activity levels are just much higher on 4G. So if operators can make it easy or facilitate a quite painless migration path for a subscriber from, let's say, a 500 or 1 megabyte or 1 gigabyte data plan to 2, 3, 5 gigabyte data plan, and if operators make it easy for the subscriber to kind of monitor their usage and migrate to higher monthly data allowances without locking them into lengthy new contracts, I think that is another way that operators will be able to monetize 4G networks. And related to this is the idea of the self-care apps. Again, just coming back to EE in the UK, I mean, that has been very it is very much positioning its self-care app as the kind of doing away with bill shock, because you get notifications that 80% of your usage notifications begin that you're nearing the end. And I think if operators can, in tandem with that communication, real-time communication with subscribers, if they can use that communication to, as I said, migrate subscribers to higher data plans without putting in place lots of hurdles, I think that is one really effective way operators can monetize the network. So I think also related to the whole pricing issue is operators really must move away from unlimited pricing, because it's devaluing access to the network. So the successful 4G operators are pricing 4G access beginning at around 500 megabytes, and we're seeing the kind of the mid-market LTE price plans topping out at around 5 gigabytes. I mean, some LTE operators are launching the premium LTE pricing with 10 gigabyte plus. But I think for the vast majority of consumer users, up to 5 gigabyte is kind of doing the job. And I think that offering the unlimited access, operators really need to kind of have a close look at how sustainable that is. Operators, just kind of a final point on developing markets and where LTE is at in those places, in these places. I think operators in these developing markets need to carefully assess why they want to launch LTE and decide when is the right time to launch. So some questions I think these emerging market operators need to ask is what's happening with the 3G network? Is it coping with demand for data? Are the 3G, if 3G devices are too expensive for the majority of the market, 4G devices certainly aren't going to be any cheaper for the next 12 to 24 months at least. So operators in emerging markets really need to assess whether there are specific opportunities that 4G will enable them to approach that 3G doesn't allow them to. So what are the main reasons to launch 4G? I think questions that really need to be asked, and I think I do kind of question some of the thinking behind the token network launches when the cost of equipment is much higher. At the moment, if you're not going to aggressively target the market in a coherent, phased approach, then maybe now isn't the right time to launch 4G. So that's it for the webinar today. Like I said at the outset, this presentation is based on Informa's recent and ongoing research into LTE, and I look forward to updating you on the latest developments as LTE operator service and pricing evolves and the market expands and accelerates over the next year. So now I think we've got time for a few quick questions. Apologies that I haven't left quite as much time as I would have liked for questions, but I'm just seeing the first one coming through here that I think is a really good one to look at. Actually, it kind of arises from some of the points I was making about Verizon expanding its LTE network, and it's does Verizon's partial LTE network outage mean that LTE is struggling to keep up with data demand? Well, I think that's right. Verizon did recently say that the amount of data, specifically the amount of video consumption on its LTE network, was more than it expected. So I think the details are that Verizon saw degraded LTE service in some of its major markets, some major cities in the US, and I think one way that it's planning to handle the data traffic and specifically the video issue is by adding more capacity. So I think this really links back well to the to some of the points that have been made this afternoon, and that is that operators need this is really a kind of luxury problem that the operators are in. I think Verizon's situation highlights the growing demand for mobile video services, and I think if operators can meet this demand and factor the network sufficiently well to cope with the demand, as Verizon is doing since those sporadic network problems, I think that it's actually it puts operators in a great way, in a great position to meet demand for increased data and increase their revenues. I think more than anything, the surge in demand is good news if mobile operators can look at this as an opportunity to monetize traffic. So that is, given that we've run out of time, I will be able to get back to the questions offline, and I will be sure to get back to you via email on any questions that have been raised. So, as I said, this presentation has been drawn from the recently published research, which is looking at successful operators' 4G strategy and how it can improve KPI. 4G can improve KPIs. So it's been fantastic to have the opportunity to share with you some of our recent findings that myself and my colleagues have been making on LTE, and I wish you a good rest of the day and look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you very much.